Today on episode number 92 of the podcast, we're discussing educating the public and what we wouldn't have known without experiencing sight loss ourselves. What's up, VIPs? Welcome to Life After Sight Loss Radio, the podcast helping you discover life after sight loss. My name is Derek Daniel. I am your host and resident VIP, aka visually impaired person. And joining me across the table, as always, is our co-host and our resident sighted supporter, my lovely wife, April.
That's me.
All right, so today we're talking about educating the public. It's one of those things that is, well, kind of annoying, but as someone told me when I first lost my sight, it is my job to educate those people. And what I thought about was, you know what? We didn't know a lot of those things before we experienced sight loss.
Right.
And so I thought we'd share some of those today. Of course, we can't share everything in this one podcast, so I've got some resources for you over in the show notes.
And if you're looking for those show notes, they're at lifeaftersightloss.com/092. Show notes include links, resources, and ways to subscribe. So head over to lifeaftersightloss.com/092.
That's right. Okay, so this actually comes from a comment I got on something, a video, a picture, something, I don't know. But somebody said they were so tired of educating the public. You know, they were just sick of it. They had to tell people the same things all the time. And it was just, why can't people get it? And you know what? I get it. I do.
For sure.
I totally understand.
For sure.
Because I get the same things constantly, the same questions, the same sort of like, why are
jokes
you
or comments or anything
this?
like that.
Yeah, all that stuff. And so it's like, you know what? That is annoying. However, I realize that we as people who experience sight loss, and myself, we didn't know some of these things when I was sighted, and probably wouldn't know them had we not experienced sight loss, or at least encountered somebody who had experienced sight loss. So I think we've got a few things today. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but we've got a few things to go through of things we didn't realize until we experienced sight loss.
Right.
So let's go ahead and start with number one, and that's digital accessibility is in lots of things. I get this all the time. How do you use an iPhone? How do you use an iPad? How do you use a computer? How do you all this stuff?
How do you watch a movie? How do you,
all this stuff. And the reality is digital accessibility is built into so many things now. It wasn't always this way, so maybe this question was valid 20 years ago, but now, I mean, you go to the movies, and, you know, we're going to talk about that later, but you go to the movies, you get your audio description headset, you know, it's right in there. Or you turn voiceover on your iPad. Stuff's just built into everything.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't know that if we didn't have to use it.
And not only when it comes to screen readers and voiceover, but also the accessibility when it comes to Zoom and things like that, because I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but just because you're blind doesn't mean you can't see anything. So you can still see, when you have something zoomed in, you can still see what's on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we're talking about digital accessibility, but accessibility in general, there's so many things and so many ways to make things accessible.
Right.
When people don't know that, it's not really surprising, because why would they know that, right?
They don't need it. That's not something that is an important thing in their life, because it's not something they need to function.
Absolutely. I always think it's funny when I see reviews of an iPhone and they'll say, oh, you can turn this setting on your iPhone. Just go to accessibility and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, no. You're not allowed to use that. It's like, that's not fair. But they use accessibility when it is going to benefit them.
Right.
Dark mode, something like that.
Right.
And they just don't realize all the wealth of accessibility that's in there because of, people that are hard of hearing or people that are visually impaired, things like that. So lots of stuff going on. So accessibility built into all kinds of things. All right, so now and I'm talking about digital accessibility, and my iPad's going nuts right now. So
oh, man.
That's always how it works, isn't it? All right, here we go. So number two is... There it is.
I can say it.
Yes, say it, please.
Not everyone is totally blind.
There you go. Oh, no edits in this one. No edits. Not everyone is totally blind. That's right. That's such a common theme, especially in movies and TV shows. You see the person with the dark sunglasses and a cane, and they're completely blind.
Yep.
And that's what people always assume, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're blind, you're totally blind. There's
fumbling around, trying to find, a pin or a door handle or something like that. It's like, that's not real.
Absolutely. And the thing about it is, I never knew the spectrum of blindness until I lost my sight. Because then when I lost my sight, there was a while a lot of years, I would say, where it's the struggle of being sighted with poor vision or visually impaired with remaining vision.
Right.
There's that sort of two dynamics, and we've talked about that on the channel before. But the reality is, I am visually impaired. I have enough of sight loss that it affects my everyday life.
Correct.
And so I am a visually impaired person, or VIP. But not everybody is totally blind. Not everybody's visually impaired like me. It's such a wide spectrum.
And not every person with the same eye disease or condition has the same amount of sight loss either.
Absolutely.
So you could know two people with the same disease, but one have more sight loss than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea that everybody's just totally blind is just simply not true. But I wouldn't have known that. You know,
Right.
I remember growing up, there was one lady that my parents knew who was totally blind. I believe she had RP, retinitis pigmentosa. And by that time, she had been blind long enough to where it had taken all the rest of her sight, and she was totally blind. And so naturally, we all just are like, yeah, well, that's blindness. You know,
Right.
everybody's just totally blind. But there's so many eye diseases. There's so many reasons people have loss of sight. It's just not down to one thing. And so total blindness, I guess I wouldn't have known until I lost my sight. But now that I know, it's so commonplace,
Right.
you know, that I realize that. All right. And speaking of eye diseases, not all eye diseases are fixable with glasses. Again, this is one of those classic things people always ask.
Yep.
Can't you wear glasses?
Yep.
And I always want to sarcastically say something like, oh my gosh, glasses? Thank God you're here. I would have never considered that.
Never thought of it.
Yeah, and so I don't say that because that's mean and rude, but I think it a lot.
Yeah.
But people's perspective on fixing sight is glasses, because you
Right.
go to the eye doctor. They
Right.
tell you if you need, I mean, you wear contacts,
Yes.
you know, and glasses.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. You go, you need a correction, you put on glasses. But there are so many reasons why you couldn't wear glasses. You know, mine is my optic nerve.
Right.
My eyes themselves are working fine.
The glasses
You know.
don't give you sight back.
No,
they correct what you've already
They correct
lost.
what you have.
Your impairment.
Yeah,
They correct that
that's right.
impairment.
So I have sight loss.
Right.
The glasses aren't going to matter. That's one reason I get upset with things like, I won't mention it here, but digital magnifiers that you wear on your head, and I think people will understand kind of what I'm talking about that. They always, they quote things like, you know, giving your sight back. I'm like, no, you're not.
Right.
You're
Right.
not giving you, it's just a magnifier on your face, which are great. I mean, magnifiers are wonderful, but glasses, those kinds of things, you don't get your sight back. And so when people ask about glasses, they're just asking based on their perspective. And I think I would have asked the same thing.
Right.
You know?
Well, I think using the term visually impaired means that there's something wrong with your vision. So the easy fix for an impairment is glasses, or for a visual impairment is glasses. Well, maybe we need to start saying more like, I have sight loss, instead of saying I'm visually impaired, because I think maybe they're thinking, oh, well, glasses fix vision problems, so that's the fix. Why not?
And I think that's the thing. A lot of visually impaired people would say, well, they should just know. They
Right.
should know what
That's
VIP
true.
And the reality is they don't. How would they know?
And there are plenty of people out there who are visually impaired who can wear glasses to correct some of their vision loss, but maybe not make it to where they can necessarily drive or
Right.
be able to, you know, see print that isn't in large print, or, you know, just see a regular font.
Right. So it throws the sighted people off when
Right.
people are wearing glasses, right?
Yeah, because again, there are so many degrees of
Yes,
sight loss.
Absolutely. Not everybody's totally blind, and we can wear different things. And so it just comes down to their perspective. This is all they know.
Right.
And they won't know until we tell them.
Right.
And so if I tell somebody, no, my vision can't be corrected with glasses, or surgery, that's another one, you know, surgery. And they're like, oh, well, then now they have a little more perspective. Are they
Right.
totally in on it like we are? No. But at least they know a little more
Yeah.
than they did before. The next one, this one is so hard for me. Asking, how many fingers am I holding up, is offensive. Like, it's so offensive. I don't know why. It always makes me think, would you go up to a person who couldn't hear and scream at them like, hey, can you hear me? You know, no, you wouldn't do that. That's ridiculous. But people are constantly, they think it's funny. Like, well, how many fingers am I holding up? Like, are you trying to prove that I'm blind? Is that
Right.
will this prove?
Trying to
like,
trick you.
If I say I don't know, will that now prove it to you? Like that's the, or the old flinch test. Like they'll move real fast at you, because if you flinch, then you're not really blind.
Right.
And that goes back to that whole not everybody's totally blind thing. But again, I probably would have done the same as a sarcastic jerk if I was sighted and didn't know any better. I would have been like, well, can you see that? And because here's the thing. My daughter, who is 10, she did it, and she's done it before. And she learned now. She knows the difference. But she's like, well, how many? I'm like, that's no. Well, then one of her friends at school, I think, did that when I was at school one time. And she was like, no, that's rude. Don't do that. So my daughter now knows.
Right.
Because she has experienced sight loss along with me, if you will.
Right.
And so now she can train other people. But those kinds of things, like, that's just so rude. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
So hopefully we can train and educate people not to do stupid things like that.
That would be the best.
That would be.
I don't know how realistic that is, but it would be great.
So true. All right, this next one is sight loss is not always connected to another disease. I think a lot of times we see somebody who's lost their sight, and because the stereotype, you think about people like Helen Keller, who was had a loss of sight and loss of hearing,
right?
And she's pretty famous in the visually impaired world. You see other people who might be in a wheelchair and have sight loss. You see people who have just different things connected because maybe it's from birth, and a lot of times from birth there can be other things going on.
Sure,
but my sight loss is from a disease that has nothing to do with anything else. Now, we don't know a ton about it, so it might have some other effects on the body, but at this point,
we don't know of any.
It's sight loss.
Right.
And so it's not always connected to other things. But again, I think the stereotype is, oh, you have eye problems. It's got to come from somewhere, so there's something else wrong with you.
Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about the whole idea, you're in the medical field. I mean, you learned a little bit about eye diseases.
Yeah.
But we were talking about
very
how
little.
Very little, right. You were talking about how you learned a little bit but it didn't really go into how it affects people or some of these stereotypes,
right.
In nursing school. Yeah,
so in nursing school you just learn you learn the anatomy, of course, and then you learn kind of like we learned about macular degeneration and we learned about retinopathies and but very surfacey. We don't get a lot of in-depth things, and until you get into a subspecialty or a specialty and then a subspecialty, even further in than that, you really don't learn the details and the mechanisms of how sight loss works and how it can be connected with other diseases or how it doesn't have to be connected with other diseases. I mean, I really only know what I know, which still isn't very much, because of Derek's sight loss. I work with babies and mommies having their babies, so that's not my specialty. But in nursing school, in medical school, I feel like they may not even learn as much as what we would hope that they would until they get into that specialization.
Have you ever, I think we probably mentioned it, at least between the two of us, have you had blind patients in the past?
I feel like I've had one, but maybe just on the floor. I don't think that I actually took care of her.
Gotcha. And I mean, it's, blindness is not, I mean, it's common, but it's not like it's super common necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, that's the other thing about educating the public. When I had not lost my sight before, again, I knew one person that was blind. That was it. And granted, I was in a small town, so the bigger towns, more people.
Sure.
I didn't know anybody else that was blind. And so all my knowledge came from that one person who, again, was totally blind.
Right.
Lived with their mom because they were older and things like that. And, it's just, it was what it was. But now, when I lost my sight at 18, that really opened up the door to meet other people who lost their sight and then start to open up these sort of things.
Right.
So it's not very common, and that's not really all that surprising either.
Yeah.
So, all right. So the next one, this is a pretty common one. Blind people still use words like look, see, watch, stuff like that. Many a times I have I've talked to people and they'll say, hey, did you see that movie? Did you hear that movie? Or whatever. I'm like,
seriously?
You can say see, it's fine. But again, I think if I didn't know about it, again, that my sarcastic nature, I probably would have said that too. Like, oh, I bet you didn't see it. And people have said things like, for example, there was something the other day and it was something on social media and I said, oh, well, I didn't see that. Just, as a normal phrase that people use. And they're like, well, I know you didn't see it. And it was like, no, it wasn't supposed to be a joke. Like, I didn't see it. Anyway, forget it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I wasn't trying to be funny. Like, I was just saying it just in natural conversation.
Yeah.
And so we still use words like, yeah, I went and I watched that movie. I read that book. Because if I listen to a book, I'll still say, oh, I'm reading a book right now, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I rarely say listen to it because for some reason when you tell people you listen to it, they're like, oh, that's
That's cheating.
That's not good enough. Or
It's
whatever.
not, actually.
So I still use words like that. It's just very normal and very common.
I think it's important to also realize, though, that not everyone, when they're saying, oh, I bet you didn't see that, or I'm sorry, maybe you didn't see it, they might be trying not to offend you as well. Like, oh, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, or I didn't mean to, draw attention to the fact that you didn't literally see it. Not everybody has ill will in their in their hearts.
No, not everybody does. And that's the thing, though. I think as we educate people, most blind people I know will use these words and not be offended by it. And so when people are trying to be not offensive, sometimes it comes across that way.
Sure.
That, it's like, no. And so just educating, like, it's cool. Like, you can say watch, that's fine. I think whether they're trying to be snarky or they're trying to be compassionate or whatever, it's just a good opportunity to educate them and say, hey, I still use that word. That's cool.
Absolutely.
Because
it's okay for you to use that word because I use it too.
Absolutely.
It's not out of my vocabulary.
What I think it does is it helps them get past the sort of wall that is my blindness, past that to me. Because it's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of other stuff about me that's cool, not just the blindness, but let's get past that, and that's okay. I always tell people, because people will joke about my blindness, probably because they're not sure, it's uncomfortable, let's make a joke about it.
You joke about it.
I joke about it, it's fine. But I always tell them, there's way better things to make fun of me about than sight loss. I've got a lot of quirks, there's way better stuff. So once, get to know me, get past that wall, we're just like, oh, see and watch and so forth. All right, so the next one is this. Actually, this is the last one. Blind people still go to the movies, the bowling, hiking, all that sort of thing, because we just like to live our lives. And some of these things are sight intense, like, for example, we went hiking a couple of weeks ago, I guess.
Yep.
And I had my guide dog with me, which he did fantastic. But yeah, we still do all those things because we want to do those things.
I enjoy it. So I make him come with me.
I always say, my wife likes it, and I like my wife. So, that's what we do. But, we go to the movie, well, when we can. Right now, it's sort of,
not happening, but,
we're listening. If you're listening to this, it's during the time of quarantine. So, but we still do those kinds of things. I remember going to play laser tag, which I was not very good at because it's very dark in there. I did get let's say 20 people. I got 16th place. So those other 4 people felt bad about themselves probably. But, we still do all those things. And again, I think if I had not lost my sight, I would question that. You still go to the movies? Or I do think I should get a discount to the movies because I'm only experiencing half of it. But that's just my own personal opinion. But I think, all these things are just things we do. Why wouldn't we do them? Just because I'm blind, I now am unable to do these things.
Right.
I might do them differently, but I still can do them. So I think it's important to not only educate the people, but remember, if you lost your sight, would you think blind people go to the movies? Would you think blind people go hiking or whatnot?
Play sports.
All those sort of things. Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, it's important to remember that we still do all those kinds of things and to let people know that we still do all those kinds of things. All right, guys. So here's our question for today. What is one thing you may or may not have known if your family member or somebody you know hadn't lost their sight? What's one thing? Was it one of the things we listed here? Was it something else? What's one thing you wouldn't have known if somebody you know or yourself hadn't gone through sight loss? All right, so a few housekeeping items. First of all, we want to let you know that if you like the podcast, if you're enjoying it, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast.
So if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And I lost my train of thought, so sorry. Okay. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you get notifications with every new episode.
And if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, make sure you subscribe in your favorite podcast catcher. That could be Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. All the links to that are going to be in the show notes, lifeaftersightloss.com/092. We also want to hear from you. You can reach out and contact us. My email is Derek, D-E-R-E-K, @lifeaftersightloss.com. We'd love to hear from you. You can ask questions, give us your comments, your thoughts, share your stories, and you can also contact us or get in touch with us or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Links to all of that, as always, are in the show notes. Okay, so let's go to your final thought. what is the one thing you have to educate people about when you tell them I'm blind? Like if you have somebody, because I know you've mentioned to people, oh, my husband's blind, or your coworkers or whatever. What's something they always seem to either ask or have to be educated about when you tell them I'm visually impaired?
So most of the time, the most common question I get is, can he drive? That is the most common question. And I always say no. I'm not quippy and quick on my toes like Derek is, but I'm like, nope, can't do that. And then I go through the central vision loss and peripheral blah 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 blah, and we talk about accessibility with his computer and the phone and things like that. So those are the most common things that we talk about when it comes to your sight loss. Now, some people ask, does he cook, or does he help clean the house or things like that? But most of the time it has to do with driving and, computer usage.
Very interesting. So. I usually say something like, yes, I can drive, but your mailbox wouldn't want me to.
Right. And I would never remember to say something like that.
I need to write down some things for you to say.
So just whip them out.
Yeah. So when people are like, hold on, let me pull this paper out, that'd be good. All right. So we've got our quote for this week. And let's just go for it, dear. What's our quote? So
this quote is by... How do you say the first name?
I have no idea.
Okay, I'm going to just go with it.
Just butcher it. It's fine.
Rochelle
Sure.
E. Goodrich.
There you go.
They say, you can teach a person all you know, but only experience will convince him that what you say is true.
You can teach a person all you know, but only experience. So, sometimes it's like, look, I read this in a book. Let me tell you about it.
Right.
And they're like, oh, that's nice. But it's like, I went through this. Now I can really tell you about it.
Yeah.
And so when we're sharing with the public, with general people about sight loss, we have a perspective that others don't have. It's one thing to read in a book how not everybody is totally blind, or that blind people still do things, or whatever.
Right.
It's one thing to read in a book and talk about it. But if you get somebody who has experienced something in life and they share their story, that's much different than reading it out of a textbook.
Absolutely.
So it's so important to remember that you have a story to tell, and your story is impactful, so much so that it will affect how people view other visually impaired people down the road. So make sure to always share your story. All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up for this week. As always, we want to thank you for listening wherever you are. And until next time, remember that sight loss isn't the end.
It's just the beginning.
My name's Derek.
And I'm April.
And we'll see you in the next one.